Hello, 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 everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to another 2 sections, maybe 3, in Chapter 4, still reading Sacred Contracts, written by Myss. All right, so we are talking about the subject of our shadow. I have to admit, while I've been on my journey since I had my awakening about 4 years ago, I hear much about shadow work. And I don't know if that's necessarily what I was doing and what I continue to do without putting a label on it. But as I read, of course, I'm learning more and realizing that I myself still have a lot of shadow work to do. And I have a feeling that it's something that just never ends for any of us, the way that our spiritual journey never ends. So let's go ahead and get started on our next section here. Shadow contracts. We're going to read about that, and then we're going to read about confronting the shadow, and then depending on time, I may add on return of the orphan, which is another aspect of an archetype, the orphan or the abandoned child. So that's the other term for it. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. Shadow contracts. Just as your archetypes are neither good nor bad, so too your sacred contract is essentially a neutral force. One person's contract is not more important to the universe than another's. Every contract is essentially the same in that it covers what each individual needs to learn in their lifetime. For that reason, we are put in places and in roles that best serve our contracts, whether that means we are born into royalty or poverty or somewhere in between. Whether you find yourself in a life filled with challenges such as serious illness, injury, or war, or whether your life is relatively free of trauma, you will have agreements to keep and a contract to fulfill. As the Tibetan Buddhist teacher Sogyal Rinpoche likes to say, there is poor people suffering and rich people suffering. Don't envy others because you can't know the extent of their suffering just by looking at externals. Whatever your material lot in life, any external difficulties are vehicles for you to work on your internal challenges. On some levels, it's obviously much easier to be rich than poor, but even the prosperous cannot sidestep their inner challenges or their appointment in Samara. In this regard, people often ask me if a contract can include an agreement to commit murder, rape, or other heinous crimes. Could Hitler, Stalin, Mao, or Pol Pot have had contracts to murder millions of people? Questions about such enormous villainy are difficult to answer, but no, these criminals did not have a divine order to kill. It may be that some people have agreed to a life in which they encounter dark forces and have to choose how to deal with them. As each of us is growing individually, we are also evolving collectively. Each of us has a dark side, along with our own grace and light. The extent to which we can acknowledge the former while maximizing the latter may determine how we choose to fulfill the terms of our contract. When the shadow side takes over even one person, the consequences are tragically felt by many. Even psychiatrists and brain scientists cannot offer a conclusive response to the question of whether individual people are born to murder. Social psychologist Stanley Milgram's groundbreaking book, Obedience to Authority, demonstrated that often it is not so much the kind of person a man is, as the kind of situation in which he finds himself that determines how he will act. Milgram developed the controversial obedience experiments conducted at Yale University in 1961 and 1962, in which subjects were told by scientific authority figures to administer electric shocks to another person if he answered a question incorrectly, no matter how that person reacted. Milgram had expected that American subjects would not follow orders that seemed to hurt another person, especially if the person being shocked were screaming in obvious pain. I've never heard of that study, have you? Yet he found, surprisingly, that 65% of his subjects, ordinary residents of New Haven, were willing to give apparently harmful electric shocks up to 450 volts to a protesting and seemingly suffering victim. Of course, the shock machine was a sham, and the subjects were not really hurting other people, who merely pretended to be in pain and even begged for mercy at stronger and stronger shocks as they were supposedly administered. Sadly, though, Milgram reported, with numbing regularity, good people were seen to knuckle under the demands of authority and perform actions that were callous and severe. In the aftermath of World War II, when people had assumed that Germans were more influenced by orders than other cultures, the obedience experiments were a cultural shock for Americans, who prided themselves on being nonconformist. As Milgram said, it may be that we are puppets controlled by the strings of society, but at least we are puppets with perception, with awareness. And perhaps our awareness is the first step to our liberation. What is in one is in the whole. Murder and torture occur because humanity as a group does not yet sufficiently value life in all its expressions. Perhaps that lack of a sacred vision leads to the incarnating of bleak and brutal experiences. We all share a potential for becoming either the instigator or the victim of harm, whether physical or emotional. What we do to heal the victim and the aggressor within ourselves is the universal contribution we can each make toward healing the whole. That's a really huge thing to understand. Because when we talk about people like Hitler and Mao and Stalin, who were responsible for so many atrocious and horrific and senseless deaths in this world, it's really hard to fathom the deeper meaning behind it, the spiritual aspect behind it, and the fact that essentially he had this role to play of victim, or of the, what do they call it? Not the victim, but the perpetrator. And it was up to him how he chose to play that out, or up to him if he decided to play that out or to use his power in a different way. So it's I find that Hitler and, subjects like that are very controversial in general, but especially speaking on a spiritual term, they especially can be. All right. And if we are ever to achieve our highest potential, we need to be, at the very least, puppets with awareness, in parentheses. People who commit heinous crimes, including mass murder, did have other options to learn what they needed to learn. They had the choice to act appropriately and morally, just as we all do, but they exercised their free will, chose wrongly, and heaped untold suffering on others. Ultimately, I believe they themselves do suffer, whether in this life or the next or both. Perhaps these individuals have agreed to act as reflections of the darkest shadows of human nature. Although God has not assigned them to commit great evils, they may have been presented with a choice to act, and evil is one outcome of their choice. It is a basic spiritual impulse to try to find meaning even in tragedy, which awakens our need for greater action, justice, and protection of human rights. Uncivilized behavior, murder, and tyranny strengthen our belief in civility, civilization, and democracy. Undisguised bigotry and hatred wake us to the need to practice love, compassion, and tolerance. It may seem facile to say that the Crusades, the Inquisition, slavery, the Holocaust, Stalin's purges, or the killing fields of the Khmer Rouge were meant to be learning experiences for the rest of us, especially when atrocities continue today under the guise of ethnic cleansing or the will of God. But I would argue that our awareness of the potential for escalating evil has led us globally to condemn and curb attempts at mass murder. Nonetheless, looking at the forces of fundamentalism, civil war, and corporate greed around the world, we may have even harder lessons to learn. Now we have Confronting the Shadow. And I'm so sorry if you hear scratching in the background. My cat is in here and he's scratching on the wall. I don't know why, but he does that. And yeah, he's just sitting here staring at me. I'm hoping he doesn't jump on the dresser, which he is very, very good at. He does it a lot. Okay. Learning to confront and ultimately manage your shadow, no matter how daunting it may appear, is an essential step on your road to spiritual maturity. Lucy's life is one illustration of how your world can change once you decide that you and not your shadow will create your future. Lucy spent years trying to please everyone but herself, which is hardly a rare dilemma. I had read a book a few years ago about a woman who decided one day to just pack up a few belongings and take to the road without a map or a personal agenda. Lucy told me. She was just going to take her life one day at a time. I was filled with envy when I read that. Her story made me feel like a prisoner, and from that moment on, I was miserable. It wasn't my job, it wasn't my family. It was me and my belief that everyone's happiness depended on my being in their lives. I encouraged their dependency, and at the same time, I resented every one of them. Whew, that hit me kind of hard. I know that, there's probably a lot of moms out there that may feel that way. But sometimes when you allow people to be a little bit too dependent on you, you have to step back and realize that it is not, especially when it comes to children, your children are as dependent on you as you allow them to be, especially at a certain age. And that is something that I have had to come to terms with and really need to work on and am trying to work on as we speak. That just hit me really hard. Almost felt like that could knock me over with a feather. Lucy realized that she was determined to control every person under her care because by keeping them dependent on her, she would not have to face her own weaknesses. She could tell herself that her family members were the children or victims, and she was in charge of the tribe. The anger that would erupt in her when their problems got to be too much was her inner self attempting to communicate to her that she was using her power to prevent people from taking charge of their own lives. Her fear of not being needed caused her to fear their independence, and yet their lack of independence caused her to resent their weaknesses. Gosh, that's like a hamster wheel, right? Just being stuck on resenting something that you cause. I think we all do that. We all do that in one way, shape, or form with somebody in our lives. There's a lot of people that do that. Again, I think it comes down to a lot of it is people pleasing and maybe the way that we were raised, especially certain generations. Many people fear their own empowerment and unconsciously encourage their shadow to thrive. This happens in particular when conscious empowerment represents change, which can be terrifying. Change signals loss of control and entry into the unknown. But even beyond fear of change, empowerment represents isolation, which people will do anything to avoid. Perhaps this is the very core of our paradoxical view of empowerment. Our image of awakening and fulfilling our divine potential evokes the idea of an individual who is whole and complete, separated from lesser mortals, isolated and alone. Culturally, we have yet to envision a realistic, appealing model of the spiritually empowered human being, someone who is simultaneously vulnerable, capable of sensual love, and worthy of a mate. We believe that enlightened people don't have the same needs or vulnerabilities that we do, or the same shadows. We also believe that enlightened people don't age, don't suffer, or mourn. I have seen the archetype of the whole perfected human at work countless times in people. You would think that someone with her occupation would be above such emotions. People say when a spiritual role model is shown to have feet of clay. Or, you should see the way he lives. He's anything but celibate. We do not want to be whole if it means being alone. And we do not want enlightenment if it requires living as an ascetic. And if you're not familiar with what an ascetic is, it's somebody that lives a highly disciplined life, religiously or for spiritual reasons. It can be a group or an individual person. And a lot of times that also includes physically whipping yourself or hitting yourself in some way as a way of atonement, as a way of cleansing, as a way of showing your dedication or your love or your faith. So that's an ascetic or asceticism. And now I lost my place here. Oh, so deep within our unconscious, we feed the energy of the saboteur, that part of ourselves that maintains our shadow pattern and fuels our fragmentation. We fear our own empowerment because it represents changes in our lives that would remove us from the warmth of those who love us for being vulnerable. And we fear being empowered because then we can no longer claim that we are not responsible for our actions. Although we want to be around a person who is enlightened or consciously working on becoming enlightened, we deeply fear the high price our own enlightenment will make us pay. Assuming personal responsibility for the quality not only of our actions, but also of our attitudes is a lifetime discipline. We cannot rest in the harbor of blame. So we unconsciously and sometimes consciously encourage our own weaknesses and hold on to our fears. As long as becoming enlightened represents isolation for us, we will shun our own empowerment. We fear to realize our highest potential, and this inevitably affects our creative, financial, and career potential. After you introduced me to this idea, a man named Maury told me, I started to look at each person in my life as representing some power in me that I needed to realize. This perspective was naturally far more useful when it came to dealing with those individuals with whom I knew I had a power struggle. But still, I became observant of exactly what made me feel powerless in certain relationships. And I would then study that feeling in me. I thought about how I would change were I to fill in that part of me with self-esteem, for instance. In each case, I could see immediately that my life would change dramatically, with each choice I made to respond consciously to every interaction I had. I think I might need to make a note of that. That's a really wonderful way to look at people, especially the people that you struggle to get along with, whether it's a coworker or a family member or, even a friend who you've just kind of always bump heads with. That's a really wonderful way to sort of step back and look at from that perspective to kind of see what that person is there to teach you and perhaps maybe what you're trying to teach them, because it does go both ways, always. If you're in their life to teach them something, odds are that they're in your life to teach you something. It's a two-way street. Maybe I should make a note of that. I didn't have my notebook or my pen ready because I haven't felt the need to take any notes reading it out loud. But if you guys want to make, or if you guys have made any notes, I applaud that because I haven't done it. So people in life representing some power in me that I need to realize. All right. In one case, I was with a friend who was celebrating his new membership to a very exclusive country club. I don't have the income required to belong to that place, and my first response was envy. I resented his being able to afford the type of life he has. But then I separated from him and turned the mirror on me. I confronted the fact that he represented a kind of power that I had not developed. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that my resentment went beyond just that description. I had to admit that I resented the fact that he had the discipline to go the extra mile to mature that power within him. And the funny thing is, the person that he is envious of probably has no idea that he's even done that consciously, and obviously will have his own aspects to work on as well. So never envying somebody. That is a huge one, and it is so hard not to do that. But everybody lacks in some way, and everybody has an archetype and something they need to work on. I don't care what the what the picture looks like or what they look like aesthetically, there's always something behind it, something that they need to look at in the mirror. And that's also a good thing to remember as well. Okay. Oh no, I already read that. Okay. Nope, I already read that. Whereas I was more inclined to look for reasons to knock off early from work. He saw everything as an opportunity and did all he could do with his job. My resentment had nothing to do with money. It had to do with the manner in which he managed his potential. Once I admitted to that little insight, I knew from that point on I would have to take full responsibility for making lesser choices regarding my own opportunities in life, because he and I were being handed the same chances. The only thing that was different between us was our response to those opportunities. Now I force myself to go that extra mile, but it's not easy. Every time I hang in there, I hear a voice telling me to find an excuse to take the easy road. Some part of me obviously does not want to grow up, and it's that part of me that waits until Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock to declare that the weekend has begun, just as I did when I was a kid. That's funny. Sorry, I have an itch. The symbol of the 3 o'clock school bell told me how deeply the child in me wants life to be a vacation. But I am understanding myself better each step of the way. I am recognizing my saboteur and my dependent child and other patterns that indicate that some part of me simply does not want to manage an empowered life. I also have to admit that I derive great inspiration from my country club friend, because I now see him as representing my potential instead of the life I cannot have. He's simply a few opportunities ahead of me. Maury chose to respond to his feelings of envy about his country club friend by recognizing that they were the consequence of his own power deficits. He separated his shadow responses from his feelings of friendship. He realized that he resented the power his friend had to maximize his potential and appreciate all the opportunities life had to offer. And he was finally able to unearth his deepest resentment, which was that his friend could handle rapid changes in life, whereas he needed to have things move slowly because he was afraid of losing control. His friend had faith in the unknown, but for Maury, it was fraught with danger. You know, I have to say, I can understand where Maury is coming from, because I've never been a highly driven person to want to climb some kind of like a corporate ladder or belong to fancy, country clubs or anything like that. But I do really, when I see certain people on YouTube that are so successful in being healers and in working more in that realm of life, something that I'm super interested in with Reiki and healing and being very knowledgeable about the subjects that I'm very passionate about, I do find myself being envious as well. And I know that if I put the same time in, I could do anything that I wanted to do as well. And I love my job and I love working part-time, and I could pick up extra hours, but for me, I don't value money or look at material things the way that most people do. I always have enough. I always have what I need. I'm blessed to have much more than I need, most of the things that I want. And I never fear about those kind of things and things that I guess that other people want. And, the bigger house and the nicer cars and the designer clothes just don't call out to me. It's other things in life that don't really have value, of a money value, like time. Time has no value in that sense. You can make money back, but once time is gone, it's gone. And that's kind of how I look at it. And that's sort of why for the longest time, I've enjoyed staying home part-time, because I've had time with my kids. I've had time to be like more of a homemaker, and I will do it as long as I can. And I really, really used to envy the women who were able to do that. And somehow I'm able to do that now. I don't know how, but I do get some flack from it at work sometimes because I'm not there 40 hours a week. And I just kind of sometimes wonder if it comes from people that wish that they had the same thing, that wish that they could do that. But then at the same time, I don't drive a brand new car. I don't live in a brand new house. I live a very modest life. I don't have any credit cards. you set yourself up kind of however you want to live. And the more bills you have, the more you have to work. It's like that song. I don't remember. I think it was Jay-Z who sang it, or Puff Daddy when he was Puff Daddy. More money, more problems, more money, more bills. That's sort of how I look at it. So I relate to him in that way, that there are times where I wish I was a super career driven woman, but at the same time, what I would want from it isn't things like that. So maybe the same thing, but just different categories of desires and what I would want to get out of that. Anyways, that was totally a personal opinion there. All right. I think we're almost done here. Yeah. Because Maury, I think I already read that. Yeah, actually, I already read the whole thing. And then I stopped. I think I read this. Because Maury could analyze his shadow responses through his archetypal patterns, he was able to realize that his saboteur and child within were in fact extending him an invitation to realize his potential. On yet another level, Maury decided to work through an issue with his friend with whom he had a contract to support his own empowerment. Okay, so that's it. I think I read that part twice, but just in case, I didn't want to leave it out. So we're going to stop right there. And in the next video, we're going to read Return of the Orphan, which is an archetype, as I said. And then we will read, that's the last section, but it is the longest one. It's about 6 pages long. So I will read that last section in our last video that will conclude chapter 4. And then we will move on to chapter 5, which is titled Identifying Your Archetypal Pattern. Ooh, I can't wait to get more into this. The introduction of it and the explanation of it, I think, was super important, but I'm really excited to get into the next parts of the book. And yeah, so all right, so I lost my bookmark somewhere. Here it is, my little picture that came in this used book, this sweet little family picture. I'm just using it as a bookmark. All right, well, thank you guys so much for joining me. And if you guys celebrated Mother's Day, I hope you had a beautiful Mother's Day or a beautiful weekend. And I love you all very much, and I will see you all again soon for the last section of chapter 4. Take care of yourself, take care of others. Until next time, bye-bye.